Okay, it's recorded. Tonight's conversation is about the admissions cycle from 8th grade to spring of senior year. And I thought this would be a great starting point for this monthly series that I want to do, because sometimes people come to me a little later.
Could you try again?
Sometimes people come to me a little bit later in the application cycle, and some of the things, some of the stuff's kind of baked in and we can't undo what's been done. So if you have an 8th grader, and I know there are 8th grade parents and 9th grade parents on this call, the first question is going to be, where's your child going to school? And you're going to have your public school, which is great. You know, you can get them in, you know, you can afford it. You might have a magnet option in your area. Sometimes those magnet options are free. Sometimes you have to pay tuition to go to a different program at a different school. Private day school, parochial school, residential school, and of course, homeschooling. What I would say about all that is I would really make the high school decision around where your 8th grader is, not about college. That's just so far down the road that I would really make the decision around where your child should go to school, around where they are now, not what college might look like. And my last piece of advice is, whatever you are doing, even if you are so sure your child is not going to your public school, when the public school comes around to enroll students, I would have your child enroll. Because in the event your plans change, showing up right before Labor Day and trying to get enrolled might have some limitations. So when they come around in the spring, most schools start somewhere between January and March to enroll the 8th grade cohort. Do it even if you don't think you're going to go. So that's what I'll say about that. So the next way station or point in the cycle would be spring of 8th grade, when your high school comes around and start signing you up for courses. So most freshmen will take some sort of English. It used to be pretty standard biology, but now there's like a physics first movement. So they will take an English, a science, and usually some sort of global or world history. There might be choices around those in terms of rigor. Is it honors? Is it college prep? Different schools do different things, and there's decisions to be made around that. But the big decisions for 9th grade are around world language and math. To be most prepared, to have the most options, you want to plan on taking 4 years of a world language. So what does that mean? It means you might test into French too, but is that really your best option? If you are on the fence with your child and your child's just like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure, you know, can I sustain French 2, 3, 4, and 5, or possibly AP? There's nothing wrong with just saying, hey, I'm going to go into French 1. If you're on the fence, I wouldn't push that, because you don't want to have your child get so exhausted through French 2, 3, and 4 that they refuse to take it as a senior. Selective colleges will expect 4 years of a world language. So that's the first question, the first choice where you might start to be glad that you're aware of that as you're making that choice. The math is where the real division starts to set in. So the math sequence for the uninitiated is algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, then pre-calculus, then calculus. After calculus, there's different options for linear equations, multivariable, and calculus is the goal. So what happens if your child does not test into geometry as a freshman? What are your options? They've got to take algebra 1 as a freshman, but there's an option sophomore year to double up at most schools. You can take algebra 2 and geometry simultaneously. You don't have to have one before the other. And that is where I get a lot of kids somewhere between 11th and 12th grade. They've got the bug, they're leaning towards something in STEM, either biology or nursing or engineering, and they are not on course to take calculus. And it is often too late to do anything about that. So if your 8th grader tests into algebra 1, just be aware, is there an opportunity at some point to be on track to get to calculus as a senior? That's the big thing. So the next thing is as this is happening and you're making decisions around this, and I'll put this out there now, is as they're in 8th grade, spring, heading into 9th grade, when do you even start to talk about college? And I think that if you were to think about college as a car, if you had never been in a car, you wouldn't say to a kid, what car do you want to buy? Because they've never even been in a car. You might say, hey, let's go see what a car looks like. But so there's doors, there's a steering wheel, like, let's sit in it. What do you think? It's, and I think that I would introduce college more about that. Like, let's see what a college looks like. Not like, are you going to get into a college? Of course they'll get into a college, but more like, let's just try college on. And now where I live next to a school, very near a school called Monmouth University, and a lot of kids, I'll say, just go see Monmouth. I'm like, I don't want to go to Monmouth. I'm like, I'm not suggesting you go there. I'm suggesting you go see it. It's a medium-sized suburban school. Get a feel. What do you think of it? So when should you start seeing colleges? I think the opportunity to see colleges should be taken whenever it is available. And I'm putting this out now because when you have a 9th grader, and I won't tell kids this, but I'll tell parents this, colleges will forgive transgressions in 9th grade, academic weaknesses in 9th grade. They will let a C slide in 9th grade world. So you have the luxury in 9th grade of, if they have a poor grade, to just be like, oh, that's too bad. I know you really liked Penn State when we drove through. That's a shame. Are not getting good grades. You can kind of throw it back at them and say, so part of the essence of getting onto a campus is to get them a little bit motivated. Like, this is why you're doing your homework. This is why you're paying attention in school. This is why you're trying to do well. The other piece of the equation that I would say is parents should know about, and is that the 4 years of college are kind of like running a mile on the track. Every year is seen kind of uniquely. So what colleges want to see is, from 9th to 12th grade, is increasing rigor, increasing academic performance. So when you are picking those 9th grade courses, and you will get those parents that, like, they are very verbal that their child's taking all honors. Like, don't worry about them. Pick a course load for your 9th grade students going to stretch them a little bit, but not stress them. And they need to do well, but they need to give themselves room to do better as they go. So you don't want to overshoot 9th grade and then there's nowhere to improve. The other thing I will say about college visits is, when you start to get out your calendar and figure out when you're going to go see colleges, colleges are open from the end of August to the beginning of December, and the end of January to the beginning of May. That's about 7 months. If you have any sort of athlete on your hands, that might preclude fall or spring semester of really being able to get on campuses. If you have a job, other children, when you start to figure out when are we going to go do this, it can become not easy very quickly. And I'll tell you what, I try to go see schools all the time, and I'll say, oh, this school has tours every Saturday, but the Saturday I'm going to be there, there must be some mistake. And you find out, oh, the one Saturday you can be there, it's their break, or they're on retreat, or whatever. So going to see schools on the earlier end is pragmatic. You can see schools when they're not in session, but you're not going to get the full vibe of who's on this campus. So when your child goes to high school, you obviously want to support clubs, sports, activities. I'm a real fan of any activities that they're doing outside of school, because those can be wonderful havens. If school is having some challenges, those outside activities can be really nice havens, and vice versa. If the outside activities maybe aren't super great, or they're going through a tough phase at school somewhere different. So you want to support and facilitate that stuff. 9th grade coursework, in the spring of 9th grade, you'll pick your 10th grade courses. And again, you want to, if you took an elective in ninth grade that was maybe not academic, maybe you layer on an academic elective, maybe you add on an extra honors course, but you want to step up in some capacity in 10th grade and do better. Now, the other thing that I would say, it is never too early to talk about is money. Whether you can afford $80,000 a year or not, nobody is that excited about that. And if you have a 9th, 10th, 11th grader, I think if you're at an expensive school, you will see that price tag at some point in your child's college career. So having a talk about money and just putting it out there saying, colleges have all different price points, it's something to be aware of, casually, not in any stressful way, but just to put the money talk out there. Every admissions webinar I'm on with people, with the actual admissions people, they say, we don't understand how deposit day is May 1st and families are calling us with kids crying on April 30th, how they've had no conversation around this. So early and often. So 10th grade, the big thing that happens in 10th grade is the PSAT, which is nothing to stress about. But what I would say to your child is have a good breakfast, show up and try. Because I get kids that come in 11th and 12th grade and I'm like, okay, well, did you take the PSAT? They're like, yes, I got an 880. And I'm like, okay, did you try it? And they're like, I drew a geometric pattern. And I'm like, okay. So the PSAT is nothing to be stressed about, but it can start to provide a little bit of a gauge. Did you do really, really well? Great. Did you try and not do well? Okay. Maybe we're going to be going down the test optional road. We don't know yet, but it's just a good, a little bit of like the Harry Potter sorting hat, starts to let you know where you are. And just to start to plan. Obviously 10th grade, you want to be doing better in the courses that are hopefully harder. And I would not worry, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, you might look at your child and just go, yikes, how's this kid ever going to pick a career, or what are they going to major in? And I wouldn't worry about that. That will come into focus as they, in 11th and 12th grade, that will come into focus. And I would not worry about testing in 10th grade. Some people say, should my child be testing in 10th grade? I don't think so. The one thing I would say, somewhere between 10th and 11th grade, somewhere between the ages of 15 and 16, people say to me, what could I do to help my child get into college? Get a job, go work. And a lot of people say, oh, they volunteer. I don't want them working. It's too stressful. I want them focused on their academics. Volunteering is never that stressful, probably. I don't think it is. You're not going to get fired from volunteering. Getting a job at a fryer, at a shorter place, lifeguarding, jobs where you have to interface with the public, and you come home a little wiped out, and you go back to that job the next summer, and it shows colleges like, oh, they showed up at this job and they were hired back. That shows they did a good job. So I had a kid, he is a parking lot attendant at a beach club on Ocean Avenue, and just wrote this amazing essay about regularly interfacing with law enforcement to deal with unruly, people that wanted to poach parking spots at this beach. And, it's it shows okay, you've had to deal with the real world a little bit. So 11th grade, you're at the halfway mark, and you will find the energy around this conversation changes. And testing comes on the horizon. Now, a lot of schools, the drumbeat at schools is you test in the spring of 11th grade, and that's not wrong advice, but you really got to look at your child's situation. If your child is a high caliber spring athlete taking AP courses and IB courses, and they are doing that testing in the spring, and they're doing a high level of athletics, perhaps spring of 11th grade is not the best time for your child. So it becomes a question of really looking at your individual situation. If your child is an athletic recruit, August of 11th grade might be a great time to test, to be able to talk to coaches with a hard set of scores. So when you test, it becomes a very personal decision. What test should you take? Well, the ACT and the SAT. I suggest you could get the big thick book from Amazon and you could do a simulation of each. See, some kids score very evenly on the testing. Some kids really favor one test. Even if you score evenly, you might prefer a test, one test over another. So that is one way to do it. Should you prep? Look, I am no fan of the testing system. It's flawed, but the reality is it unlocks options and money. So I always tell kids, try and do the best you can with the testing and just leave it there. I have kids, the family says, we are not testing. I'm like, great, there's thousands of schools that don't require test scores. And one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that schools that were never test optional are now test optional. The question, especially if you have an 8th, 9th, 10th grader, is are all these schools that are test optional going to stay test optional? Some of them have committed to staying test optional permanently. I feel the vibe from others is like they just can't wait to get back to testing. So the 2022 kids have a lot of test optional choices. Is that going to continue? Stay tuned. I don't know. I think more and more schools will stay test optional, but I think some will revert back to testing. So what I would say, and the testing is a personal choice. Your school might say point blank, don't test, but you might look at your situation and decide to do otherwise. This whole process, and in 11th grade, if you've been through this already, you will feel the energy shift and you will feel the people that were boasting about all honors, they'll be talking about, their thing. And I would really, really not engage in that energy. I would not feed that beast. This is a highly personal thing that you're about to do with your family. And it's personal around your child's academic style. It's personal around finances. I can say that this is, every family handles, how they're going to handle their child's curfew or how they're going to handle their child's driving uniquely. And I would just, this is your personal stuff. You don't need to be, you can just be very if someone says, what are you doing? You can be like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Just be non-committal about it. It's just not, it just doesn't help anything. More than half of the colleges accept more than half of the kids. And the selective colleges, the most selective colleges are selective because they get a lot of applications. It doesn't mean that a school that doesn't have a low admit rate couldn't be quite excellent in the education it provides. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So in 11th grade, you start to turn some corners. And part of my idea around this presentation was talking about some of the psychic changes that happen along the way. So the beginning of 11th grade, one of the things that might happen is your child might start to really swap up their interests. Maybe they're sitting on the bench in their varsity athletics and they're like, you know what, I think I want to do something different. Or they are doing a club at school that they're like, you know what, I don't really like that club anymore. And that might feel terrifying to you. You might be like, how will you ever get into college if you quit everything you're doing? Now, if your child does a complete 180 and quits everything, maybe you have a different set of problems and maybe it does need to be addressed. But if your child says, I don't think I want to do that, and I maybe changing things up a little bit, let them do it and let them just see. Create a little space and see if something positive fills that space. Maybe they just work, maybe they work more. Maybe they are taking harder courses. Maybe they just need a little time and space. I wouldn't be afraid of that. It might feel like, oh no, you're not going to be a varsity athlete. What is that going to mean? Well, maybe it'll mean something wonderful. The other thing is that you will start to see a sense of direction evolve. They're taking AP psychology and they love it, or they're doing something with something at school and they're really drawn to it and they see something. And the other thing I would be doing is really starting to see some colleges if you haven't already done so. So the thing about the college visits is, if you're going to go back and like when I work with a kid on a full comprehensive package, like, in fact, I just talked to a kid today and he said, I heard you're working with my friend and I told him he is going to hate you and then he will love you when he's done. Like, he literally said that to me. And I thought it was so funny, because if your child is going to go back senior year with their applications drafted, they have to know where they're applying in the beginning of the summer, or have a sense of where they're applying. So you really need somewhere by the summer before senior year to have a sense of where you're applying to do those applications. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do some visits senior year. You can still do a little backfilling and use senior year, but a lot of people say, oh, we're going to start to visit colleges senior year. And that becomes a little bit of a hair on fire situation. You can certainly use senior year to test some more. You can certainly go see some schools at that time, but you better have a sense of what you're doing by the end of your junior year in terms of what your working list looks like. So the next corner you turn is January of junior year. And January of junior year, you can really start to say, wow, like, I'm applying next summer. It starts to become a little realer. And what I get at that juncture is kids in 10th grade that were like, I'm going to West Point, I'm going to California. And those kids have suddenly backed off that. They're like, hold on a second. Maybe I'll do ROTC. Maybe I'm not going to California. And January of junior year, sometime between January and that spring, they're going to pick their senior courses. And that is important. And I get these kids in August, they come in, they've never worked with me. It's August before senior year. And I'm like, what are you taking? And they give me this list. And I'm like, go right back to your guidance office, because they're like, intro to film, intro to this, intro to that. And I'm like, that's not a college prep curriculum. Go back to your guidance office. And they're like, what? And I'm like, go fix this. So it starts to become a little bit realer, but what they're taking senior year is really going to matter. The next little cycle that your child will pass through is in August of their senior year. They're going to see the kids as they approach their senior year. They're going to see their peers that were a year ahead of them leaving for college, and it gets really much more rubber meets the road for these kids at that point. It becomes tangible and much closer. And so the next thing that happens in the fall of senior year, and this can be a challenging time, is athletes start to commit and the early decision announcements get announced in December. And that really starts to shift things around, because two things happen. If you are not in that round, if you did not apply early anywhere, it can start to feel like those kids have it all figured out and you don't. And that's not a great feeling. But I am here to tell you that just because you're a signed athlete or you've applied binding early decision and gotten in, it doesn't mean they have it all figured out. Many an athlete transfers, many an ED kid, they end up, maybe it's not the right place. So sometimes it works out for them, but it doesn't always. And it can start to feel like those kids have some kids have it all figured out, you don't. It's just not reality. So January of senior year, January to March becomes a real limbo period. You really don't have submitted your applications. And I suggest that kids use that time to just kind of reflect and play, like, you can almost play with it. Like, okay, if I got in everywhere today, where would I go? If I took out school A and I got into schools B through G, where would I go? Kind of just play with it a little bit without having to produce any answers. The final college answers, they start to come in March, and they usually by the 1st of August or 1st of April, or some schools, a couple of schools that like do the first week. The Ivies this past year did the first, they think they did April 7th because they were just so overloaded with applications. So what happens next is you get all these answers, and basically between April 1st, say you get your last answer April 1st and May 1st, you've got 30 days to submit one deposit. So May 1st is National Deposit Day. So if you have a senior, I would strongly suggest that you keep your April open to do revisits, to if you're deciding between a couple of schools, to have the opportunity to go back and see them. What else am I forgetting here? So the other thing I will say about 11th grade is it is very important to be aware that those are the teachers that you're probably going to work with and ask for a letter of recommendation. So you want to walk in 11th grade, kind of, if you've been the class clown up until then, maybe it's time to back off that vibe, come in purposeful, and be thinking like, which one of these teachers can speak to my academic work. It doesn't have to be a class where you did the best. It might be a class where you had to go to a lot of extra help and really work very hard just to get a B. That's okay. It doesn't have to be where you were the best. It can be where you had to work hard, or they really got to see a side of you that could speak to what type of students you are. So that is something to just keep in the back of your mind. You know, in 12th grade, you can still be doing visits, you can still be testing, you can still be modifying your list, but you certainly want to have a working list and a sense of where you're going to be applying so you can get that work done over the summer. I really stress the idea of going back to school with this work completed, because senior year, you are taking your hardest courses and you need to be doing your very best work. Much like the mile on the track, you want your fourth loop to be your fastest, and you want to have the best grades, and it's going to be the hardest coursework. You also still might be testing, and that's okay. I tell my seniors or any kid that I'm working with, if you are doing pre-calculus as a senior, and that's okay if you ended up just, you know, starting algebra 1 and not accelerating at any point. If you are a senior taking pre-calculus, you might really want to make sure you test in November or December to take advantage of getting a little bit of that pre-calculus curriculum, which is the last curriculum that's part of standardized testing. So if you're a kid in pre-calc as a senior, you know, you might want to make sure that you're testing in December to just see if your math score pops at all. But if you want, you know, if you're going to go back senior year and do your best and have the time and space to enjoy your last year at home and possibly still be testing, you don't want to be, it's too much work to do on top of all the rest of that work. And nothing is stressful when you have enough time. I tell my kids, you do not want to be submitting the day it's due. You want to give yourself 48 to 72 hours. You want that work in. And I'll tell you, a family that I was informally advising, they waited till the last minute. They did it on a Friday night that it was due, and there was an issue. And they called me on a Saturday, and the admissions office is not open. The admissions offices are not open on Saturdays. And they were so upset about the glitch that they had run into, and they had nobody to call. There was nothing to do but wait till Monday. So don't do that to yourself. Get your stuff in physically to give yourself room. If there's an issue, you can call up and say, hey, you know, was my essay there? I'm not sure if it was, I thought it concluded it, but so those are the things to be thinking about between spring of 8th grade through spring of senior year. I am happy to answer questions if anybody has any. I'm going to do, before I take questions in case anybody wants to jump off, I'm going to do my next one on October 11th, all about money. Where's the money? Who gets financial aid? Where does merit come through? How do you approach this? You don't want to pay $80,000 a year. This is how I can walk you through how colleges are going to evaluate your ability to pay and what it might look like, where might scholarship money be, and more importantly, specifically where scholarship money is not. I had a family come in one time, they were like, we want scholarships and we're applying to the Ivy League. And I said, okay, no. So next I'm going to do October 11th, I'm going to do about money, and I'm going to do November 15th about like the nuts and bolts of applications. Like, what is early action? What is early decision? What is rolling? What is priority? People are like, there's a priority. What does that mean? So I'm going to, that's my plan for October and November. So if anybody wants to jump because they've got stuff to do, great. If anybody wants to stay on, I'm happy to answer questions. And thank you all for coming. And I will get this recording and make it available for you. So if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and open it up.
I have a question.
Please.
Oh, sorry.
Maura,
So
you
go
trying
ahead.
to ask a question?
I was going to ask a question. Yes, I wanted to
Muted
ask
if you are.
about how do you feel like the teachers' recommendations? Because I feel like it's important for kids to get to know their
Maura?
teachers. Sometimes they don't.
Are you muted? You're muted. Oh, maybe you guys can't unmute yourself because I might have muted you.
Don't show your face. Audrey.
No, you're not all muted.
Can you hear me now? Everyone else can hear me
I
except
can't
for
hear
you.
you. You want to put your question in the chat, Maura?
Yes.
Put your question in the chat and I'll read it.
Okay.
Yes, what about teacher recommendations?
Oh.
Sure, yeah. And that's why I'm saying in 11th grade, just have an eye on that. Just be thinking like, okay, I want to build relationships with these teachers and then ask for letters of recommendation. Ideally, you're asking teachers for letters of rec from divergent areas. Maybe something in the STEM area, maybe something in the humanities. Ideally, it's not always that way, but that's a suggestion. Sometimes kids are like, you know what? I've got, English and Spanish, and that's what I'm doing. I'm like, okay, that's who can write to you and talk about you positively. Great. Other questions? You see, other people are unmuted. I thought. Meg, did you have a question?
No, I thought I was muting myself. I'm good. Thanks.
Oh, Meg, go ahead. Say it again.
No, I'm okay.
Okay, somebody else. If your child did not do well in COVID, it's okay. There's a place in the Common App to address that. There is, we live in the United States of America. To quote Ted Fisk, who wrote the big thick book called The Fisk Guide, like, we have an embarrassment of college choices in this country. There is a lid for every pot. I've got kids that come in here and their parents are like, oh my gosh, I only had a 2.2. And I'm like, look, you're going to get them in college. You can always find an option. And if your child is in 9th or 10th grade and didn't have a great time in the COVID era, I would say to them, you know what? It's a new game every year, and do your best. And then you can write about how I didn't do well in freshman and sophomore year, but then I turned it around and I've got, all B's. So absolutely colleges are forgiving. And there are so many choices in this country. So if your child has struggled in COVID, struggled with online, many kids have, there will be options. I think that they are forgiving, and I just think that I mean, look, you can be a convict in this country and go to college, and there will be options for any kid that wants to go to college and that is maybe, say, in 11th and 12th grade, turned it around and made an effort. Absolutely, no doubt. Any other questions that people want to put in the chat or just ask out loud? Feel free. Todd, are you unmuted to ask a question, or are you just unmuted?
No, I wanted to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Louise. So Philip's a senior, and I don't know, I don't think he's asked or approached teachers about letters of recommendation as of yet. Now, I know you mentioned, junior year.
Mhm.
So he needs to go back to, teachers he had last year. Can he, I'm assuming it's not a smart idea, or it really wouldn't work if, like, first semester he meets a teacher he really likes, and he probably wouldn't have spent enough time with them for them to write a letter, right?
I in this era, I would say anything might be possible. Certainly the other thing, I mean, typically it's a junior year teacher, but especially in the pandemic, if a kid was online, maybe it's a sophomore year teacher. I would never say never, but I do think that having a senior year teacher, those letters are often due by the schools by like October 15th, November 1st.
All right, so it's
It
kind of,
might
all
not
right.
be ideal
All right.
to have a senior year teacher. But in this era, I do think you might, if a kid says, I really think maybe my sophomore year teacher for, English might be good. It doesn't have to be a junior year teacher. It just often is. And that's why I would have an eye on it junior year, just walking in with that mindset of like, okay, I'm gonna, try and keep my eye on this, just to try to see if there's a teacher that might be able to write for me.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anybody wants to ask? Okay, well, you know what? I want to thank you all for coming. If you do have a question that maybe you didn't feel like asking because it's more personal to you, feel free to send me an email, and I will send out links to my October 11th presentation on money. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Maura. I hear you now.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise.